I am. Anybody else? I have to drive, right? Because Ahmed doesn't have the slides. Yes, yes. Yes, I am. You have a picture, right? Okay. Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone, and welcome. And welcome to our panel in the part of the conference from Art in Our Image, Artificial Intelligence and Humanities, or in our image, excuse me, Artificial Intelligence and the Humanities. And today we are talking about art and AI. And the focus of our panel is this kind of provocative question: can artificial intelligence create? And what is the role of the artist? And so shortly, I will introduce our panelists and talk a little bit about how you can ask us some questions, etc. But first, I want to give you some information about questions. Good afternoon, everyone. And my name is Marian Mazzone. I am a professor of modern and contemporary art at the College of Charleston, and I will be moderating this afternoon's panel. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone that you need to log into YouTube to participate in today's discussion. You can do that by clicking the blue sign in button in the upper right corner of the page and entering a Gmail account. Feel free to enter your questions or comments in the chat at any time. Be sure to preface your question with the words "question" so that we can easily recognize it as such. And I have folks behind the scene who will be helping monitor the questions so that I will be able to read them into the panelists, and we will be able to address them as we have time. So let me start first with some quick introductions so that you know who we are and why we're here to talk about this topic. First, I'd like to introduce Professor and Dr. Ahmed Elgammal. He's a professor in the Department of Computer Science at Rutgers University. He is the founder and director of the Art and Artificial Intelligence Lab at Rutgers, which focuses on data science in the domain of digital humanities. He is also an executive council faculty at the Center for Cognitive Science at Rutgers University. Professor Elgammal has published over 180 peer-reviewed papers, book chapters, and books in the fields of computer vision, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. Our other panelist is Carla Gannis. She is a interdisciplinary artist based in Brooklyn, New York. She produces works that consider the uncanny complications between grounded and virtual reality, nature and artifice, science and science fiction, in contemporary culture. Gannis holds a BFA and an MFA in painting from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and BU, Boston University, respectively. Currently, she is industry professor at NYU in the Integrated Digital Media Program, Department of Technology, Culture, and Society, the Tandon School of Engineering. She is also a Year 7 member of New Inc. in the XR, Bodies in the Space track, New York, New York. Gannis's work has appeared in exhibition screenings and internet projects all over the globe. And we'll be hearing a lot about her work and looking at a number of examples from her work today as part of our discussion. And myself, your moderator today, my name is Marian Mazzone. I'm an associate professor in the Art and Architectural History Department at the College of Charleston. I teach courses on contemporary and new media art. I am the art historian affiliate of the Art and Artificial Intelligence Lab at Rutgers University, and one of the co-founders of the Computing in the Arts major here at the College of Charleston. And I publish on issues of creativity, computational art, and AI as well. And so today, the three of us, as art historian, artist, and computer scientist, are going to talk about AI, art, issues of creativity, making art with AI, and whatever else we can cram into the 60 minutes that we have here, as well as answering questions from all of you out there in the audience. And so part of what we want to do today also is highlight the exhibition that is part of this program for the conference at the National Humanities Center. And so we will also be talking about specifically some of the work in that show and tying some of our comments about AI and art to actual examples of works of art, which is always a very important thing to do. So one of the things that I wanted to point out as the art historian is that there has always been within the history of art an interest in this idea of process and repetition and looking for systems and ways of dealing with visual imagery. And partly that has always been in concert with and in connection with issues of technology. And so I think one of the things that all of us would like to say at the top is that the use of technology, in this case AI, is not something that all of a sudden just happened immediately in art, but rather that there are precedences and there's some foundations that are being built on here today. And so to name just a couple, and for those of you who are interested in knowing more about this history, follow up on these names and look into this. We could cite people like Harold Cohen or Lillian Schwartz, both who did early pioneering work in working with computational systems, with technology, with engineering, and with mathematics, and basically in terms of generating imagery in a variety of different ways. And this, for example, is one of the outputs of Harold Cohen's system, which he named Aaron, A-A-R-O-N, for those of you who are interested. And we have also this idea, let me see if I, yeah, sorry, go back. We have also now, with the development of artificial intelligence, different ways, technology ways of thinking about how machines think and what machine learning is about. And I think now would be a good time for Professor Elgammal to come in and talk a little bit about the specifics of AI, the work that he does, and defining some terms and giving everyone a kind of grounding in what we'll be looking at.
Thank you, Marian. As Marian mentioned, the use of AI in making art is not new. It's actually as old as AI itself. It can go back 40, 50 years. And Marian showed an example of that. However, these early systems or early use of AI has been mainly involved a lot of coding of rules. That was how AI built in the 80s and 90s. You have to write a lot of rules of what you want to do, and I have a little freedom of what it can do. The examples shown are kind of on this family. There have been a lot of progress in AI recently with the use of machine learning in AI, where the machine can learn from examples. And what we're talking about today is mainly what happened in the AI in the last maybe 5 years, where what's called generative AI came to the surface, where the machine can look at many examples of images and generate more images. So if you can please go to the next slide, man. So let me explain how this process works. I mean, the breakthrough came around 2015 with the invention of something called GANs, generative adversarial networks, which has been very popular in making art using AI. And I try to explain this process in a very simple way. Suppose you want to make images of flowers, but you have, to simplify it, let's have this fictional story. Suppose you have 2 aliens coming from space, and you task them with drawing pictures of flowers. And you task one of them to draw the flowers, and one of them to judge whether that these flowers are reasonable or not. So you give the judge lots of images of flowers, and the alien artist, you don't give them any images of flowers. You have to guess what a flower is. So the alien, which in that case called the generator, will basically start generating random images. So click, Marian, please. So just view random images and give it to the discriminator or the critic, and the discriminator will obviously say this is not a flower. If I compare this to the image that I have, it doesn't look like them, so it's not a flower. So after a couple of clicks, we can see how the process goes. So basically, the discriminator now tell the generator that is basically this is fake, this is random image, it's not really a flower. And the generator will try to do something better. So maybe try to generate something that has certain patterns or colors or lines. And as it goes like that in iteration many times, it will start learning what a flower would be. And in the same time, the discriminator will have hard time tell a real or fake flower from this collection. And what you see here is actually how this process actually progress from total random to the point when it generates something that looks like flower. All right, so so this is basically how GAN work, and once it came around, as anything, any advanced AI, pioneering artists always try to use these new tools and new technologies and experiment with them. So that's very interesting because it can generate images. So it's very obvious that artists would start to playing around with this. However, there is certain aspects you have to think about here. So if you move to the next slide, the top images here show actually what these kind of machines can generate if we give them classical portraits from Western art. So as you see here, the machine tries to generate portraits, but most of the time it fails in generating a good quality portrait imitating what it sees. But in that failure came certain aesthetics, this uncanny aesthetics with AI, especially in the early days after the GANs came around, maybe like, and still now. And this uncanny aesthetics is really attractive for many artists because it's really explore new forms. And definitely that reminds us of Francis Bacon portrait somehow, but with a very fundamental difference that the AI here doesn't have the intention of generating these looks. The AI is basically failing in generating good portraits, while Francis Bacon actually has the intention of creating the deformation this way. So that's a very important point to issue to point out, the aesthetic of AI and the intention behind it. So if you move to the next slide, you'll see that AI have advanced a lot in the last few years to the point that it can generate actually very realistic fake photos of people. For example, the right hand side here shows fake images of people that are not real people, and you cannot tell whether this is real or fake anymore. Or flowers, you can even write a text describing a specific flower, and the AI can take this text and start generating a flower for you that seems very believable. So if we move to the next slide, now let's question what is the role of artists and how this process work. Next slide. So here, the artists who they use these kind of tools would feed the AI a whole bunch of images depending on the concept that's trying to generate, for example, flowers. And the AI will generate lots of assets and images like that, where the artist basically will start to curate and use or reject or iterate in this process. So if you move to the next slide, you can see this process here. So the artist's role here is basically pre-curation of the visual inputs to get to the machine, choosing what kind of AI algorithm to use, because there are many algorithms and have different capabilities, and probably tweaking the parameters of this algorithm. And then the artist will the AI will generate lots of images, and the artist would post-curate this collection. And this process itself is an iterative process, because most probably the artist might not like the results, and they have to tweak the input again and repeat this process until they are satisfied with the outcome. So it's a process that involves several steps, and the artist is in command in all these on all these steps. So let's move forward. So yeah, so basically, the way I have seen this, and we're going to see that in the exhibition, is that artists have used or actually are using this or explore using this process in different ways in their projects. And usually artists come to this with certain concept in mind, certain project in mind, and use this to AI to either generate a lot of visuals that they can integrate into their processes. A lot of they can generate, try to generate final artwork out of that, or use this as a studio assistant. Basically, use this process as a way to generate material that the artists will use after that. So we'll see several of these examples as we go forward. And yeah, so I just want to mention that AI has been around the last few years and have been part of the debate with many exhibitions and many auction houses showing AI works, and that generated a lot of debate in the art market about the role of AI, and even the Barbican Center has an exhibition in the summer of 2019 of AI art in London. Beijing Museum, National Museum of China in Beijing have an exhibition on AI art. So it had been basically in the public domain, and more and more in the public domain, and the debate is continuing.
And so one of the things I think it's important for everyone to hear right away is that you are absolutely, as a computer scientist, when you create processes and build systems such as this, and particularly the one that is being used by the artist that we will be looking at is called Playform. You, as the computer science designer of that system, were primarily interested in creating a system that would complement, aid, challenge the creativity of the artist. So very much thinking about how we can create systems that are for artists to use, not the sense that the system is going to drive what you do as an artist or overcome you, or create products that you don't want or anything like that. And so I think for some artists and for the general public at large, sometimes they there's this kind of concern that AI systems will dominate or somehow drive creativity in a way that certainly, I don't think you're saying as a computer scientist, you had no intention of creating a system like that. And I think I can say to Carla, as an artist who used the system, and others that you've experienced, Ahmed, that the artists also don't feel as if they have no control. Quite the opposite, right? And in a sense that it's how you work with the AI that is your work. Not that the AI is telling you or dominating you in some ways to tell you what to do or control what you do. So I think that's important, something important for everyone to hear kind of right at the top as we go forward. All right.
So okay, so I'll take from here. So yeah, so between this uncanny look that I mentioned from the AI or the photorealistic role, the question in my mind was what artists will do if we give them this AI, and right away I realized that these big challenges. There are big challenges that artists have to overcome to use AI in general. And that's why I created Playform. So basically, artists have to either know how to code, but that's not enough because I mean, even if they know how to code, I myself, as a student myself, I've been all my life doing coding since my undergrad, and still have a hard time catching up with what's happening in AI. And it's very hard to download an open source code and try to compile it and run it. It's impossible, not that easy at all. So for artists, it's very hard, even technical savvy artists. Artists has to have access to computational resources like cloud GPUs or GPU, these fast computing resources. Artists have to understand the terminology of what are GANs, what are training, what's deep learning. There's a lot of terminology. So there are a lot of barriers I found. And if you search even for source codes for something like GAN, you can find like 30,000 different versions out there. How to even start, and also fundamentally also, this kind of AI is not designed for artists. All this AI is designed by big corporates for other purposes, and artists is not really thought about when these are designed. And this is one of the main challenges, because if you take one of these AI systems that have been trained on faces like the one you see on the right here, obviously this model is already trained and already biased to whatever data that's been trained on. And as an artist, there are little you can do in such a system like that. What I want to do is I want to give artists the AI so they can train it from scratch with all their own data without any biases. So that's what we have been working on. We're trying to optimize the process so that we can give the artists the AI packaged in a way that they don't have to code, just plug in their images from scratch, and in an hour or something they can get results and they can interact and experiment and explore. That's basically my goal, and it has been fascinating basically to see what artists have been doing with this process. So it's really because artists start with the process and with something in mind, and I find that they are in control, but at the same time the AI outcome can really change the direction of what they have. So it becomes basically an iterative process between the artist and AI, and the outcome at the end, something totally surprising.
Kind of a classic feedback loop, right?
Exactly. Perfect.
Right. And I wanted to kind of underscore something that Ahmed said, because this, I think, is one of the real wonderful things about the Playform system, if I can be biased a little bit, is that artists can put in their own imagery, right? So so artists get to build the database, and of course, I think all of us are aware of the fact that one of the places that certain biases or certain predetermining factors can be found is in how the database is put together. And so one of the great things about Playform is the artists themselves get to create their database, right? Because often in machine learning, especially in computer vision, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of images to train these systems. Well, of course, artists are not in a position to make their own database of that scale, but Playform has been created in such a way that you can put in 100 or less of your own images and get started. And so this is a way of kind of allowing artists some agency in terms of that pre-creation step of building their own database, how they choose to use either their own images or someone else's, but also that you can get started with a relatively light number of images. You don't have to code. The system responds to you rather immediately. You don't have to have the tech, the hardware in terms of processing power, et cetera, that these systems need, because these neural networks are incredibly complicated to eat up a lot of energy. And so the system that Ahmed has kind of developed here is very much a way of allowing artists at least an early first easy step into working with this material and finding out how it works.
And I'll pipe in here that, yes,
Absolutely.
that agency and the accessibility were really crucial to me. And as an artist who is a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary artist, and I work with several different technologies, having that access and to be able to kind of integrate it into a larger practice was really exciting. So just to kind of amplify what you're saying. Affirm that.
Yeah, because I don't know of any other system that makes that possible for artists. You have to kind of, jerry rig something together yourselves. And as I say, it's going on to GitHub and you're doing all of these things that artists may or may not have the technical knowledge that's necessary to do all of that. That becomes very daunting, right? And it's at a certain point like, oh my gosh, can I really get into this or not? And so that it takes down that barrier right away. All right, and so we've been talking about the exhibition also that's part of the program. And this is highlighting some of the work that is produced by artists who use the Playform system. And we chose particularly to highlight different ways that artists have been working with this AI system. And so again, to underscore that artists have a lot of control in here in terms of what they choose to do, what they choose to input, and how they choose to interact with the system. And so I'm showing you first here 2 examples, one and then another of Matthias' work. And particularly this is interesting because he is inputting material that first existed as Xerox art and as rubber stamps. So things that were relentlessly 2-dimensional and non-moving, non-kinetic, and kind of very hand done, right? So very tactile, very painstaking in terms of kind of hand creation. And during, the last year and a half, when you're in different circumstances than you might have found yourself heretofore, he started experimenting with the AI system, putting that material in, and then kind of responding and selecting as the AI responded to the input, right? And so in a sense, I think one of the things that the text of the exhibition mentions is that a lot of the material started coming out in kind of mandala forms or kind of being put into kind of geometric compositions. And so Ahmed, is there anything you can say about that in terms of the interface between what Matthias was putting in and the predilections of the system to create certain formats or compositions?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of this loop of starting with an analog medium, digitizing it, feeding to the machine, clicking the outputs, and involving geometry on top of that, and creating videos. And sometimes actually in other works, he has actually went back to the analog again, and I treated to make something out of the analog version, out of the print of that, and then feed to the machine again. So this iteration from analog to digital to AI to analog is really can go infinite times, and it was every time you challenge what you can create. You have no idea what you can create next, and that takes you in a journey basically, and it's a creative journey, and the outcome is always surprising and amazing.
Mm-hmm. And the artist has a lot of choice in this. I mean, and a lot of responsibility in a sense, because you were going to be presented back with many, possibly hundreds of results. And so the very few selections that an artist is going to make within that system will have a major impact, right? And so in a sense, that curation, pre-curation, post-curation role is a very big one. It kind of gets into the question of what's the relationship, the nature of the relationship between the artist and AI, the AI system. Is it like a tool? Is it more like a partner? How, in a sense, do you think of that kind of dynamic? And I know Carla will want to talk to us about that in a moment. So I'm going to quickly go to our next artist and then get to you, Carla, as well, to show your work. This is Katja Grokowski. And again, the emphasis here is showing you a variety of different artists and how they choose to work with an AI system. And so Katja's work is very much a la collage, in the sense that she is taking imagery, already existing imagery, from things like vintage postcards, family photo albums, pictures of like Walt Disney World. You can see Mickey Mouse kind of lurking in there somewhere. And she's combining that with some of her Russian imagery, source imagery, for example, scenes from a Soviet era film that she remembers from her teen years, and some of her own family photograph albums, and kind of mixing all of that pre-sourced imagery together within the AI system, which starts to cut and interlace it in new and interesting different ways. And so, and then I imagine, perhaps Ahmed, you can tell me, part of this also is a kind of way of thinking like a painter in terms of how she's interspersing the pigmentation with the collage effect, right?
Yes.
Does she put these back out and make oil paintings as well, or do they stay in a digital form?
They stay in digital format. The amazing thing about Katja is that she never did any digital work before. So
this was the first time.
She do installations and sculpture and physical work all her life. And because of the pandemic, everything was canceled, and she's stuck at home like everybody, and she started exploring with this. And for the first time, she created digital works. And she basically interacted with the system many times, to the point that made the system really act as a studio assistant for her. She even gave the system a name, Asia.
Oh, yes.
And could manage to make the system really paint as her. So she fit the system her own style of work, and kept iterating and experimenting to the point that really she can now feed it some of her collages and photos, and command the system to basically generate them in her own style and with her own colors, with her own texture. Okay. And the system perfectly did that after lots of learning from her. And that's exactly what she likes. And from being skeptical in the beginning to the point of being totally dependent on these kind of new tools as part of her process, becoming like a studio assistant, trusting the machine, and assigning tasks every day to the machine now to get the next
and trusting that it will respond in an artistically sensate way, right? In a sense, it's going to do things that make sense within the artwork that it has been producing and how you've been responding to it. And it's interesting because we'll see a variety of different examples where I know that Carla also has kind of developed an avatar presence, also as a kind of way of thinking about this other intelligence that somehow you're interacting with. And Ahmed, of course, uses the icon, AICAN, as a way of kind of indicating the presence of this other intelligence that is involved in the art making. And so, like you see here, right? And so when Ahmed makes work, sometimes it's labeled Ahmed Elgammal, and sometimes I see it labeled I can, and so sometimes both. And so there's a kind of permeability here in some ways between the artist and the intelligence that the artist is interacting with within the system. Is that a fair way of saying it? So
yes, yeah. So the ICANN system is a system that is designed with totally different mindsets. So the ICANN system is really was an experiment to see what happened if we give the machine lots of images of art history from Western civilization, just because of accessibility of the data, and push the machine to generate something new on itself, push the creativity of the machine. Instead of imitating these artworks, can you push the machine to generate something that doesn't fall into existing styles, but still follow the aesthetics? And so that's what the scientific experiment to start with, not an art experiment. And the machine was amazingly generating many interesting images that the media covered and all of a sudden now these have been exhibited, and now I find myself in a position that people call me an artist, although I didn't have the intention to make art, in particular in these early times. But that basically was a different kind of goal. The goal is to really push the machine to be creative and see if we show this outcome to people, would they call them art or not, and would they associate them with some attributes like visual, inspiring, communicative, have visual structure, some of the concepts that you usually associate with art. If somebody sees these kind of outcomes, what they would call it. However, I don't see this as art itself. I see the art is in the process. I see the art is not in the image that you see on the screen. The art is how to program the machine to do this kind of task. So the art actually is in the code that went into the process to make the machine be able to generate this kind of outcome. Yes, if we look at this, then basically my intention was to make this machine to make these kind of images or that kind of art.
Yeah, and I think 2 points there. I think one is this working with this system, this ICANN system first, perhaps gave you a kind of way of thinking about how to make a creative system. And so that idea of the adversarial network and feeding it lots of images and learning what it will do with many, many images and challenging the system to generate something else, no matter what the images that you've given it are. I think that opens up the idea that is possible with the machine, and that we can build a system that will respond to artists in that way, so that many other people can use that kind of system to generate something. And so I think that was an important kind of first step, right?
Totally.
Yeah. And the other is this conceptual idea that where is the work, right? And so in the history of conceptual art, of course, the work is the concept, the idea, the machine that generates something. How it generates is variable, right? But this idea that it's the conceptual work that is the art. And so we're hearing, as a computer scientist say something absolutely the same in the sense, right? That your creative work is in kind of coding and building those systems, and that's one work. And then Carla or another artist may come along and kind of interact with that and make their work as well. And so Carla, here we are, getting to your work. Right?
Yes, thank you both. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. So this is an image from a project called Do Androids Dream of Endangered Animals? And I often find conversations on artificial intelligence pivot to the dangers of deep fakes and synthetic media and their ability to obfuscate true reality. But my intention in these works was not to replicate the perceived world by using AI, but instead to seek to produce dreamlike worlds that speak to very real issues, however, of our time. But again, through this language of liminality. And so, I described this project as a collaboration with Playform, and I trained the AI on images of endangered species to generate these skins or these texture maps that are then used to overlay 3D models. And so all of these works were generated in this collaboration with Playform, but then I took it into, as I mentioned, I'm a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary artist. I took it into a 3D modeling platform because I did have this idea. And I also describe my practice as one of a storyteller. Oftentimes I'm interested in kind of telling stories. And so there's so many different creative approaches.
Because I know you put some things in here about, well, this.
Oh, yeah. I can talk, if now is a good time, if we can backtrack a few slides,
Sure.
I could, go through some. I'd like to get to the first slide because this is just really was a pivotal moment for me, actually. And this is Ahmed at in 2019, at Creative Tech Week in the spring of 2019, and I was giving a talk at that same conference on a fictitious AI. I work with a lot of avatars in my work and have been exploring themes of AI again through speculative fiction and speculative design for 2 decades. But this was that aha moment. And I talked about that before, about accessibility and agency. And so during that talk and in a fireside chat, Ahmed started talking about issues like AI and an artistic creative process and what kind of new collaborations are involved when working with these emerging technologies. And so, I signed up immediately. And slide 2, if we go to the next one, I'm a big fan of interface. So I have been taking screen grabs as the interface changed. And so this is from 2 years ago. And that was when it was in its infancy, really. And, when we think about these nascent machine learning algorithms, these platforms, they still are incunabula in a way, wrapped in that swaddling clothing. And so if we get to the next slide, this is just my studio now, a screenshot of some of the projects. So there you are actually seeing my studio because Playform describes this as a studio for artists. And if we keep going, I don't want to go up too much time. As you were mentioning, Marian, I do work with avatars, and particularly one avatar, Carla Gannis, that's C.A.R.L.A.G.A.N. or cross-platform avatar for recursive live action generative adversarial network. I'll call her C. for short. And I have been working with this particular avatar for quite some time. We have produced 2 solo shows together over the past couple of years. She has her own Instagram talk. Sometimes we do talks together. I call her an autonomous avatar. Of course, this all, again, inhabits the world of fiction and speculative fiction and design. However, it was really exciting to me when I could actually start working with, I'm not working with the code. Thank you, Ahmed, who has already done the work on that, but working with a system and actually putting these ideas into practice. And so one of my early projects was to actually explore my own memories through an aggregation of data sets and to give those memories to my avatar. So if we go to the next slide, that's showing the kind of a process. And then that's one of the images that was produced, this memory, a Fiat convertible and a mother and her teenage daughter, a very personal memory. I dug into the depths of my own memories and started to pull them out. But then I found images online that represented for me these memories. And then I gave them to my avatar, metaphorically gave them to my avatar, C. Okay, if we keep going. Now, so this is an animated GIF showing a project, or actually a curated project. So I co-curated a show last fall, and it included 57 international artists. And I built a gallery in VR, social VR, to house the works. And at the time, this project, it was entitled, or this show was entitled, The Archive to Come. It also was a show that took place in physical reality in a gallery. Of course, people had to wear masks to attend, and online on a website. But the social VR project was kind of seeded again. I trained using Playform. I took 2 data sets, one on flora and fauna from around the world and one on architecture from around the world. And again, texture maps skinned the gallery to represent this kind of viewpoint that represented themes in the show itself, which was about archives, memories, coming together culturally across all of these different borders. So that's one example of how Playform is integrated since 2019 into all of my projects, even if it isn't always, it might not always be obvious to people. And I feel like that also symbolizes how AI is integrated into the fabric of all of our life today, and my art personally, even if we're not always aware of it. And so then this is the last project I'm going to touch on, and this is Wonder Camera. This is showing an initial part of the project, I created again, I work in these domains of these different domains of reality. I say I work in all the R's. So extended virtual reality, physical reality, grounded reality, augmented reality. So this is the grounded reality part, and this was a cabinet in progress. The Wonder Camera, it's WWW Undercamera, so it's inspired by the 16th century cabinets of curiosities, but mine is tackling the issues of our time, and it definitely has a decolonizing, post-human, and feminist approach. And I trained, again, Playform, and collaborated with Playform to generate all the images lining the cabinet that represent different themes, topics, and taxonomies, including decolonization, endangered species, emerging technology, humorous salve, etc. If we keep going, and then there you actually see the physical cabinet where, again, it's seated by, the images produced in working with Playform. And of course, I curated images, and then I started to tile them. And then I also found objects from the internet and produce this cabinet. If we go on, we'll actually see virtual reality instantiation of this. And this is the video game cabinet castle. How can you have a cabinet of curiosities in the 21st century without having a video game cabinet? And this one is an extra large one. I was also inspired by some old Disney movie with the castle and the distance. But it's also trained on Miss Pac-Man. So a less serious topic, but my favorite video game as a child. And then if we go to the last slide, that is actually the interior chamber. Online, the Wonder Camera exists as an ever-expanding project. Currently, it's on view on another online social VR gallery called Synthesis. And I'm interviewing experts and expanding this cabinet of curiosities. That was my first approach to these various topics. I'm interviewing experts and building cabinets of or wonder chambers, as I call them, and interviewing them as avatars. Again, all of the cabinets, it's hard to see from a distance, are lined by images trained on Playform. So here we get an example of me collaborating with an AI, now collaborating with humans, so different kind of loops and feedback loops going on there. And that's it.
So it's a wonderful image to stop with, right? That's great. So let me throw out a question. It's not an easy question, but it might be a prompt question to give you two a chance to kind of come back to some things you may have missed. Let's talk about creativity a little bit. How this has changed your creativity. Carla, you as an artist, and Ahmed, you as a computer scientist. Has it kind of changed how you work, how you make your work, the process in which you think about how you make your work? And meanwhile, I'm going to bop out because I also want to start looking for the questions that may be coming from our audience. And so I'm going to bop out of the slides and start looking at questions.
Oh, sure.
While you guys consider that question.
Sounds good. Well, I'll jump in quickly. One thing I was saying, again, for 2 decades, I've been working with digital technologies for quite some time, but a lot of times my work as a kind of digital storyteller, just to let you know, Marian, you're still sharing your screen. Do you want to be?
Yeah.
Oh, you do want to, you're looking at questions and sharing.
Yes.
Okay, perfect, no problem. But, and so, years ago, when I first started teaching digital art, I remember, originally saying, this is just a tool, another tool. I once was a painter, now I'm working with digital technologies. But my kind of thoughts on that have evolved significantly over the years, and particularly now that I'm working with the Playform platform. One, I love the idea of play in the title of the platform. That was something else that really appealed to me, because coming out of Dada and these whole traditions of play in art, it's not just work, it's play, and that, it really opens up notions of exploration and having fun, right? Because we sometimes, technophobia comes in, we get so fearful. But again, my thoughts or my philosophy on how I'm working with emerging technologies have changed, where it really becomes more about medium. I think we all have, kind of discussed that earlier prior to today, and it's not just a tool. And as you've heard me say already, I do talk about it in terms of collaboration as well. Ahmed.
Yes.
As a scientist, I find the iteration between science and art in these kind of projects is amazing, because I started as a scientist working on this project that involved art, and also that make me more and more spend a big part of my day making art actually, and looking at art and reading about art, and that always brings me back to the science again, because I end up understanding or questioning some of the things related to how art is made today, and how can be made, and that always bring back scientists in me, and started going back and do more science. So it really threw me into these cycles that take me from being a scientist to being a art artist, to being a scientist again, and back and forth on a daily basis, which is really, I think, is very amazing in terms of as a part of the creative process.
Yeah. And maybe this is kind of an interesting way to think about artificial intelligence, is that a very important part of intelligence, or the demonstration of intelligence, is creativity. And so in a sense, when we're working in the arts, that of course is something that absolutely is central to what we do. And so this kind of creative and thinking about creativity and working with creativity, kind of understanding better what the human creativity is like, what its patterns are, in contradistinction to and in partnership with that machine, or the system within the machine, has been, I don't know, I've not met an artist yet who has found interacting with AI a limiting or unpleasant experience, right? You may choose not to keep doing it, but I've not heard one say that they didn't find it an interesting process, or that it didn't kind of prompt them to think about what they do in some ways deeply. And I think, Ahmed, you touched on this earlier, also many artists will say they're kind of surprised at what the AI gives back to them. And so even though they may have curated and decided on a certain amount of input, they are still nevertheless surprised at what the system can bring back out to them. And that again also will kind of,
it's like phenomenology, you know. I mean, I think that's really interesting, because there was originally the phenomenology of film and the exposure, you know, with photographic processes, phenomenological notions of, you know, natural life, and now we're getting into synthetic media and the phenomenology of code, and what we discover when we start working with these systems, and the unexpected results that can happen. And those unexpected results are generally like fodder for an artist's, you know, process. I mean, if we think of earlier kind of art movements, if we think of abstract expressionism and, you know, Pollock, where he does his, you know, dance and lets the paint start to kind of, he starts to follow along, and the, you know, and he described it as shamanistic rituals, but, you know, that idea of that chance and that randomness, or that discovery or serendipity, can be really exciting to a practice.
I'm kind of trying to do two things at once, so I'm kind of trying to get to the questions as well. So excuse me, all of you at home watching, while you see my eyes being diverted. We have a couple questions that are kind of like about nuts and bolts and ins and outs of how the system works, and kind of computer science oriented questions. So I wanted to touch on those real quick, because I think Ahmed could probably answer them fairly rapidly. And one of the things that is suggested is curate strikes me as a euphemism. This person writes, it looks to me as if the artist plays a subordinate role, helping the AI system to function better, and controlled by whom. And so can you talk a little bit more about, either or both of you, about this idea of, well, what do you mean when you say curate, right?
I'll leave it to Carla.
Oh, you'll give that one to me? Okay, great. So I think that's a good question. It's a challenging question, but, you know, again, I'll look to art history. And if we think about photography and early days of photography and film and the work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction, and now here we are in digital reproduction, I think notions of art can always be changing. And we are tool makers, and we have always worked with tools to augment our existence and to augment our art practices. So like with photography, where you're working with a machine, we're now working with AI. Of course, there are new things, and that's why we're all here together today. When a system starts to learn and develop, that's quite different than a mechanical process. But I definitely feel like I have agency. As you can see, the image I chose today, this is my avatar actually making and generating a painting. This is a whole VR piece I created where I was concerned about this too. So my AI and my my avatar and I did this series of polls where we were asking people, I, of course, am the person leading this, their thoughts. And so there was one image that was generated by a GANs, and I said, who is the artist? And they chose my avatar instead of me. And so you see there she is making this painting. But I contest that. I still see it as a collaboration. I don't feel in any way that I'm a puppet of an AI, nor do I fully feel like the AI is my puppet. I feel like there are new things that are developing, and I'm not scared of change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and if I can, as an art historian, say a little bit about this too, because of course, for quite a long time, and you touch on this idea of mechanical reproduction, Carla. Now, for a very long time, artists have been using already existing imagery. They exist in a world that's surrounded constantly by a variety of different images, primarily now computer and photographic based and computational based. And so the selection, use, reuse, interchange with those is very much a part of many artists' ways of kind of thinking about making imagery and responding to their environment. And this idea that, the kind of concept, well, why am I doing this? And what is it that I'm interested in engaging with? Rather than the originality, perhaps, is the issue having to do with the image itself, right? And it kind of goes to another question that has come up, and it comes up frequently, and that is this idea of the originality and the ownership. So, if you're making something with an AI like this, who does it belong to?
Well, again, if I make something with Adobe Photoshop, what about all of the developers and all of the programmers who created Adobe Photoshop and all the Adobe products? Every time I make an artwork, and I participate in the market, I sell my art. One could actually unpack that, and would I need to pay some or give some attribution to all of the different applications that I use today? Who amongst the digital artists I know who doesn't use Adobe Creative Suite, it would be going down a rabbit hole to try to give attribution to everyone who developed all Adobe products. So when I sell a work of art, I claim that as my own, even though I've made it in collaboration already with software engineers and developers of the applications I use. So, I feel like, again, it's a good question. I think it's, I had a quote here, embrace the tensions. These are, I don't think any of us have all the answers. And that's why it's so great to have these conversations. And I'm embracing those tensions.
There's another question here that I'm looking at, and it's an interesting question. And I'm thinking of my answer, and I'm going to read it out so some of you, the two of you, can also, because it's an interesting one. Is it the person has noted the binary language that we're using in terms of separating human from AI, right? And so there's the system, and then there's the human, right? First, I might say, well, we've heard a little bit of fudging in a sense that we have named this kind of third entity sometimes between the human and the AI, like Katya has her Aisa, your Carla Gannis. So there is this kind of but
exploration of that slippage.
Yeah, that exploration of that. Thank you. Perfect. Is that if we hold on to that division too strongly, does that impede I don't know, what's the word I want?
Singularity?
We want to go there. Yeah.
Just kidding. But,
are there good reasons for holding that separation, or
I think they're ontological.
In interaction, or are we interested in synthesis? Maybe I don't.
Yeah, I think it's an ontological kind of issue. I think we live in the age of the Anthropocene, and anthropocentrism, if I can even say the word, is about humans being like the most important creatures in the cosmos, right? And so we've always had first place, and so that's something else I think people are often fearful of, and the ontology of being and me, who we are, and is epistemology. When we start talking about learning and knowledge, and like a machine is learning, a machine has knowledge, what does that mean, particularly to the humanities, but I do appreciate that question about that binary, the way we're discussing it. I think there can be more slippage, and I think there's there are many artists who are exploring that domain, and I'm trying to kind of push myself more in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's part of us. Part of it is we kind of, and I think we're anticipating that people expect there to be sometimes a kind of fraught relationship between the artist and AI, or the humanist and AI, and so we began talking that way.
Yeah,
But
and
I think
pitting them against each other. Yeah.
we're getting, and then I hope we're getting to the point where everybody's seeing that we're bringing them together. And I think all three of us are interested in that interplay very much, right? In not a separation between those two things. And so maybe our language is contrary to our purpose, right? So what we'd really like to say, somehow the language is still holding us back a little. On the other hand, there are people who are very nervous and fearful, perhaps, that we're talking about an AI that will replace or supersede the need for human created art or human artists. And I think sometimes in anticipation of that fear, that we make sure that no, it's not, it's not a scary AI, really. And artists have a lot of control over what it's doing, right?
Yeah, it's not a Hollywood monster AI.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And another question that we've gotten here, Ahmed, and I think it might be a nice one for you to consider, is in the development of Playform and in your system, what are you hearing back from artists in the early years that you've kind of responded to and refined your system as you're hearing back from artists?
Yes, when I first developed the earlier system, which was ICANN, and it was showing exhibitions and things like that, and many artists came to this exhibition, and the question I kept asked is, how can I do that? How can I use it? How can I, as an artist, how can I experiment with this? And that led me to think about how can we start giving artists this accessibility to this technology. But what that mean? Like how can how this can become a part of the artistic process, not as an AI that can just deliver outcome that the artist doesn't want. How can give more control to the artist? So the process all started from that, and giving the machine to the artist, and give them the ability to use it as a part of the process and think about this process. I'm talking to many artists. That was very fundamental to establish this and keep it going, actually. So that's basically part of my everyday till now, talking to artists and understanding how they use AI and how can we make it even more useful for them.
I think these systems are going to have all three of our disciplines, having to think differently and kind of in new and expanded ways. Because one of the questions that I don't have enough time to answer fully, to give it its fair due, but it's a good question, is, well, how will someone like me, who is a viewer and an art historian who writes about art, looks at art, how am I going to assess images in the future as more and more artists, as we imagine, will work with AI? And we don't have the answers to that exactly yet, right? Nor do artists exactly have the answers as to where this is going to take them, or where computer scientists are going to take them. So, but as Carla notes, this is why it is fun. This is the adventure, right? We don't have all the answers. We have to figure it out as we go. That's glorious, right? I mean, that's one of the things I love about it, is because it really forces me to think about, well, what is it to create something, and how does it speak to me as a viewer of this time and place, and can I get from the image the sense of intentionality and of working with the process and system, and that, I think, is at the kind of core, at the heart, at what's going to make this work interesting or important to look at. And if I'm hearing you, Carla, that's part of what you're thinking about and what Ahmed's thinking about. And so, I mean, I think in that kind of mix is where the real possibilities lie in the future.
I had a quote. I know we're right at time, but because I think that intentionality is really a key here. But also, I just love this quote. I found it earlier this morning by Ruha Benjamin. Computational depth without sociological depth is superficial learning. And so again, I think that's why our disciplines have to converge more and more so that we can create together, co-create meaningful futures, right? Where works that artists make in consort, in collaboration with machines resonate, and an art historian has something to actually take or find meaning from. Yeah.
Right. We need to make art that speaks to people. It has to communicate still, right? And that will always be at the heart of it. And so I do want to make some concluding remarks here. So I realize I'm looking at my clock. We're at 3 o'clock. And so I want to thank you to both of you for talking with us today, and all of you who sent in questions. I know I didn't get to all of them, but I hope I got to some of them. If you haven't done so, please be sure to visit the exhibition on the National Humanities Center's webpage. And I want to remind everyone that we will reconvene tomorrow at 2 p.m. for the keynote from Professor Wendy Chun from Simon Fraser University, which will be followed by a panel on the ways artificial intelligence is pressing the boundaries of humanistic thinking and how the humanities may offer new models for AI. You can find provocations and readings to spur your thinking ahead of tomorrow's panels by visiting the conference pages on the center's website, nationalhumanitiescenter.org. Okay, thanks again to everyone. For those of you in the audience, my fellow panelists, and the folks here at the National Humanities Center for all of your help. We appreciate having seen all of you, and take care.
Thank you, everyone.